Margaret Donna, I've had the pleasure of reading your poems for quite a little while, but I know quite well that you haven't been writing as long as I have.
No, although reading your work has inspired me to try to write as long and as well.
You and I, like many other Negro writers, have long been interested in Africa. Certainly I have.
Yes, Africa became, well, I became aware of Africa through the study of African art as a little girl. We received a newspaper that had a home forum page, and on the home forum page were these pictures that at first seemed to me to be quite ugly. And I must confess that the art interested me before I met the Africans. But when the students came over, I found them to be as strong and beautiful as the art finally turned out to seem to be to me.
I think it's very interesting how the art of ancient Africa has influenced the art of modern Europe,
Yes.
and even the great Pablo Picasso admits to having been influenced by the art of Africa. We're certainly very much a part of history in one way or another for 2 or 3 thousand years, and
Yeah.
in America, we are well.
Coming
We
into
run.
our
We are
own.
coming into our own, and we have been a part of America for 300 years. Our labor helped to build America. Our art, our music, helped to make it a more delightful country in which to live in. And so, this poem of mine, Freedom's Plow, tries to say some of those things, tries to encourage us to keep on creating, keep on living in spite of the difficulties that we still know. It's kind of history of our lives in this country. When a man starts out with nothing, when a man starts out with his hands empty but clean, when a man starts out to build a world, he starts first with himself and the faith that is in his heart, the strength there, the will there to build. First in the heart is the dream. Then the mind starts seeking a way. His eyes look out on the world, on the great wooded world, on the rich soil of the world, on the rivers of the world. The eyes see their materials for building, see the difficulties too, and the obstacles. The mind seeks a way to overcome these obstacles. The hand seeks tools to cut the wood, to till the soil, and harness the power of the waters. Then the hand seeks other hands to help, a community of hands to help. Thus the dream becomes not one man's dream alone, but a community dream. Not my dream alone, but our dream. Not my world alone, but your world and my world, belonging to all the hands who build. A long time ago, but not too long ago, ships came from across the sea bringing pilgrims and prayer makers, adventurers and booty seekers, free men and indentured servants, slave men and slave masters, all new to a new world, America. With billowing sails the galleons came bringing men and dreams, women and dreams, in little bands together, heart reaching out to heart, hand reaching out to hand, they began to build our land. Some were free hands seeking a greater freedom. Some were indentured hands hoping to find their freedom. Some were slave hands guarding in their hearts the seed of freedom. But the word was there always. Freedom. Down into the earth went the plow in the free hands and the slave hands, in indentured hands and adventurous hands. Turning the rich soil went the plow in many hands that planted and harvested the food that fed and the cotton that clothed America. Labor. Out of labor came the villages and the towns that grew to cities. Labor. Out of labor came the rowboats and the sailboats and the steamboats. Came the wagons and the coaches, covered wagons, stage coaches. Out of labor came the factories, came the foundries, came the railroads, came the marts and markets, shops and stores. came the mighty products molded, manufactured, sold in shops, piled in warehouses, shipped the wide world over. Out of labor, white hands and black hands, came the dream, the strength, the will, and the way to build America. Now it is me here and you there. Now it's Manhattan, Chicago, Detroit, Seattle, New Orleans, Boston, and El Paso. Now it is a USA. A long time ago, but not too long ago, a man said, all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. His name was Jefferson. There were slaves then, but in their hearts the slaves believed him too, and silently took for granted that what he said was also meant for them. It was a long time ago, but not so long ago at that. Lincoln said, no man is good enough to govern another man without that other's consent. There were slaves then too, but in their hearts the slaves knew what he said must be meant for every human being, else it had no meaning for anyone. Then a man said, better to die free than to live slaves. He was a colored man who had been a slave but had run away to freedom, and the slaves knew that what Frederick Douglass said was true. With John Brown at Harper's Ferry, Negroes died. John Brown was hung. Before the Civil War, days were dark, and nobody knew for sure when freedom would triumph, or if it would, thought some, but others knew it had to triumph. In those dark days of slavery, guarding in their hearts the seed of freedom, the slaves made up a song, keep your hand on the plow, hold on. The song meant just what it said. Hold on, freedom will come. Keep your hand on the plow, hold on. America, land created in common, dream nourished in common. Keep your hand on the plow, hold on. If the house is not yet finished, don't be discouraged, builder. If the fight is not yet won, don't be weary, soldier. The plan and the pattern is here, woven from the beginning into the warp and woof of America. All men are created equal. No man is good enough to govern another man without that other's consent. Better die free than live slaves. Who said those things? Americans. Who owns those words? America. Who is America? You, me, we are America. To the enemy who would conquer us from without, we say no. To the enemy who would divide and conquer us from within, we say no. Democracy, brotherhood, freedom, to all the enemies of those great words, we say no. A long time ago, an enslaved people heading toward freedom made up a song. Keep your hand on the plow. Hold on. That plow plowed a new furrow across the field of history. Into that furrow the freedom seed was dropped. From that seed a tree grew, is growing, will ever grow. That tree is for everybody, for all America, for all the world. May its branches spread and its shelter grow until all races and all peoples know its shade. Keep your hand on the plow. Hold on. Well, when I was a young man, I was a seaman, and my very first trip across the ocean was a trip to Africa, all up and down the west coast.
Yes, so we've read about this in one of your
In
books.
the Big Sea,
in the
huh?
Big Sea, yes.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
But even before that, I had an interest in Africa. But until I'd gone there, it always seemed to me to be so far away. You know, I grew up in Kansas, in Lawrence, in Kansas City, and then later Chicago. And so one of my earliest poems is a poem expressing this feeling of being so remote from my ancestral homeland, a poem called Afro-American Fragment.
Yes, I remember that one.
So long, so far away is Africa. Not even memories alive, save those that history books create, save those that songs beat back into the blood, beat out of blood with words sad sung in strange un-Negro tongue. So long, so far away is Africa. Subdued and time lost are the drums, and yet through some vast mist of race there comes this song I do not understand, this song of atavistic land, of bitter yearnings lost without a place. So long, so far away is Africa's dark face. But of course that's no longer really true today. In
No.
this day of the jet plane, of the rapid transfer of news from one continent to another, I don't think any of us feel so far away from Africa as we once did. I know you have written many beautiful poems about Africa, Margaret. Would you want to read one for us?
Thank you. My first poem about Africa has the feeling of far away too. Africa, I turn to meet this vast land of bittersweet. Africa, where creviced walls cradle myriad waterfalls. Africa, where black men stride through the ever-turning tide. Africa, I read these things. Her blood drifting through me sings.
Of course, when we were brought from Africa, we were brought here in chains as slaves. Now, Africans come to us as ambassadors from free Africa, from their own country. This poem of mine is about the new Africa. Sleepy giant, you've been resting a while. Now I see the thunder and the lightning in your smile. Now I see the storm clouds in your waking eyes, the thunder, the wonder, and the young surprise. Your every step reveals the new stride in your thighs. Africa.
Yes, the theme now is quite popular. But when you were writing about Africa, very few people were. Even when I began to write about it, it was not as well appreciated as it is now.
You're quite right. It wasn't. And when I first began to write, I wrote mostly about our problems that we have right here in America. You may know a poem of mine called Merry-Go-Round. You remember when the great migration of Negro workers from the South to the North occurred? They came up to work in war plants and so on. And I imagined that a family, a small family, might have moved from, let's say, Birmingham to Chicago, or perhaps from Virginia to New York, or maybe from Texas to California, and they brought a little girl with them, 6 or 7 years old, as I imagine her in my mind, and coming out of a part of our country where Jim Crow and segregation is legal, coming into the North or the West, this little girl was a bit confused as to how things might go. And one day, she went to a carnival. And at the carnival, she saw a merry-go-round going around, and she wanted to ride. But being a little child from the South, she wasn't quite sure that colored children could ride on a merry-go-round in the North. And if they could ride, she didn't know where. So this is what she said. Where is the Jim Crow section on this merry-go-round, mister? 'Cause I want to ride. Down south where I come from, white and colored can't sit side by side. Down south on the train, there's a Jim Crow car. On the bus, we're put in the back. But there ain't no back to a merry-go-round. Where's a horse for a kid that's black?
This is, to me, one of your best poems. I feel that there's no other way to have said this particular thing. I have written a poem that started out to be one thing and ended up to be quite a different thing.
Well, Porty often does that, you
Yes,
know.
and it's always surprising. This one was about the first gorilla in Lincoln Park Zoo.
Oh, yes, I like that
Uh-huh.
poem
His
very
name
much.
was Bushman, and I thought that I loved him. I still feel that I love Bushman, but the poem showed me that I was much more concerned with the boys and girls who had come from the South and had no place to live. There was this awful housing shortage in Chicago, and all of this came out quite surprisingly to me in the poem. The title of it is Best Loved of Africa. It is New Year's Day. The blasé people rise. They face a sleet-like ray of light. The low-slung skies send shadows down. It's dark. The earth is treacherous to the tread, and deep in the upstairs bedroom of his terraced suite in Lincoln Park lies Bushman, best loved of Africa, huge and beautifully black as he ever was, but dead.
Oh, what a boy. In the great black belts of Chicago and Detroit and New York, there are many problems, but life is not all problems, but there are plenty of problems. And one of the contemporary problems that has interested me greatly, and about which there seems to me so little is being done, is the problem of narcotics. I'd like to read you a poem of mine called Junior Addict. The little boy who sticks a needle in his arm and seeks an out in otherworldly dreams, who seeks an out in eyes that droop and ears that close to Harlem screams, cannot know, of course, and has no way to understand a sunrise that he cannot see beginning in some other land, but destined sure to flood, and soon, the very room in which he leaves his needle and his spoon, the very room in which today the air is heavy with the drug of his despair. Yet little can tomorrow's sunshine give to one who will not live. Quick, sunrise, come, before the mushroom bomb pollutes his stinking air with better death than is his living here, with viler drugs than bring today's release in poison from the fallout of our peace. It's easier to get dope than it is to get a job. Yes, easier to get dope than to get a job. Daytime or nighttime job, teenage, pre-draft, pre-life job. Quick, sunrise, come. Sunrise out of Africa, quick, come. Sunrise, come. Please come. Come.
This is a very strong poem. It's the first time I've heard it. The problem is frightening, and we hope that soon there will be an answer.
Well, you and I as artists know that one of the problems which we have is that many of the fine things in American art have been originated by the Negro people.
Yes.
The most popular music known all around the world, jazz, came right out of the beat of the African drums and out of the improvisations of the early New Orleans Negro musicians. The most popular songs, right out of our own folklore, our own folk background. Many of the most successful Broadway musicals have, in the old days, been written by Negroes. 30, 40, 50 years ago, Williams and Walker
Yeah.
and others. But then came a period in which they were written by whites, but about Negroes, you know?
Yes,
Porgy and Bess and
yes.
Carmen Jones and so on. I once wrote a poem called Note on Commercial Theater, which perhaps says these things better than I can say them conversationally. You've taken my blues and gone. You sing 'em on Broadway and you sing 'em in Hollywood Bowl. And you mixed 'em up with symphonies, and you fixed 'em so they don't sound like me. Yep, you've done taken my blues and gone. You also took my spirituals and gone. You put me in Macbeth and Carmen Jones and all kind of swing Mikados and in everything but what's about me. But someday somebody'll stand up and talk about me and write about me, black and beautiful, and sing about me and put on plays about me. I reckon it'll be me myself. Yes, it'll be me.
Yes, and it is you.
Well, not me. I'm speaking of the artist in general.
Yes, I know,
It's
but I'm
you.
speaking of
It's
you.
Gwendolyn Brooks. Uh, it's Ralph Ellison. It's others of our very fine writers to just dwell on the writing field. And of course, we have, I think, splendid creators in other fields of the arts as well. You know, we've come to a sort of impasse in race relations. We've had all the wonderful demonstrations and marches and freedom rides, and wonderful words have been spoken, and many of those words that have been spoken about the Negro problem in America have been very sincere words, sometimes even great words. But on the other hand, all of the word mongers are not really very, well, shall we say, very helpful. Even though they are sincere, they say these words, but they don't implement them. And so I call this poem Sweet Words from Liberals on Race. Sweet words that take their own sweet time to flower, and then so quickly wilt within the inner ear, belie the budding promise of their pristine hour to wither in the sultry air of fear. Sweet words so brave when danger is not near, I've heard so many times before. I'd just as lieve not hear them anymore.
I agree with that most heartily.
You know, Margaret Dana, my name, Langston Hughes, has often been associated with just social poetry or racial poetry. But I've written many other kinds of poetry, lyric poetry, folk poetry, religious poetry, and I'm particularly fond of my lyric poems.
I think that we all are fond of your lyric poems.
One of the little lyric poems of mine that I like very much is called Borderline. I used to wonder about living and dying. I think the difference lies between tears and crying. I used to wonder about here and there. I think the distance is nowhere. Now that little poem just came to me like a song out of nowhere, and I put it down, and I don't believe I changed a word or a line. Many of my poems just come, you know. I sort of write poetry by ear. I don't work over it a great deal. When I write a short story or certainly a novel, sometimes I make as many as 4 or 5 drafts. But in writing poetry, I just sort of let it flow through me, and sometimes I revise a few lines or maybe cut off an excess verse, but to me, poetry sort of comes easy. How does it come to you, Margaret?
I wish that I could say that. It comes very hard to me in most instances. I've worked a year over some poems. I've tried to write purely lyrical poetry, but I haven't attained that skill yet. The social conscious seems to keep coming in. But one poem that came easily through a kind of anger is to a cold Caucasian on a bus. It was provoked.
Wonderful title.
Yes, it was provoked by my grandson. You know, you mustn't bother grandsons. And this baby was eager to ride the bus and to sit on the front seat by people. And he's a happy little baby, and he wanted to smile at everyone and did, and talk to them about what his mother cooked and what she ate. And he said that his mother liked barbecue, but she liked it so hot. And he hoped that this gentleman sitting next to him didn't like hot barbecue. And so then this to a cold Caucasian on a bus came quite spontaneously. Smile at my golden grandson. Answer his amiability. Get a hold on your legendary Christianity. He is only 3 and is chattering because, and hereby help me, Jesus, Baha'u'llah, or any prophet, Asian, African, or Hindu. I have not yet sung to him the lullaby of hating you.
A very nice poem indeed. I have a number of poems about music, and particularly about jazz music. So I might read for you my poem, Trumpet Player, 52nd Street. 52nd Street for a time was the center of jazz in Midtown Manhattan. It's the street where Billie Holiday sang so often. And one night I heard this trumpet player sort of take off on his own and play so beautifully as if he had no regard for the patrons. He wasn't paying very much attention to the background of the band. He was just playing for himself. And so I wrote this poem. The Negro with the trumpet at his lips has dark moons of weariness beneath his eyes, where the smoldering memory of slave ships blazed to the crack of whips about his thighs. The Negro with the trumpet at his lips has a head of vibrant hair tamed down, patent leather now until it gleams like jet, were jet a crown. The music from the trumpet at his lips is honey mixed with liquid fire. The rhythm from the trumpet at his lips is ecstasy distilled from old desire. Desire that is longing for the moon, where the moonlight's but a spotlight in his eyes. Desire that is longing for the sea, where the sea's a bar glass sucker size. The Negro with the trumpet at his lips, whose jacket has a fine one-button roll, does not know upon what riff the music slips its hypodermic needle to his soul. But softly, as the tune comes from his throat, trouble mellows to a golden note, and suddenly the smoky air grows sweet, and dreams come back to stumble down the street.
Yes, that's a very lovely poem. I have not written one about music exclusively. I've written a poem about a sparrow, though.
Would you read it for me?
Yes, a sparrow is a bird. Why would a robin think that a sparrow was made to fly in a narrow line and tug at the bugs and worms that the robin struts away from with dislike? Be but a scavenger. A sparrow, too, is a bird, and who can tell a bird when to fly, or teach him when he must observe a place, stay in it? The minute a sparrow is hatched, he's a bird, and he girds his loins and determines to eat any kind of vermin he pleases, and breezes around the Ming blue everywhere, and if there must be a tiff for a cherry or very choice worm, although he didn't begin it, he will fight back, hoping to eventually win it.
That's a wonderful little poem. I love your subtle humor, you know. A sparrow is a bird.
A sparrow is.
I have written many poems derived from the Negro spirituals or from my own contacts with the Negro church. The favorite poem of mine of that nature, Margaret, is one called My Lord. And it came to me from a childhood memory. In our little church in Kansas, where I was christened as a child, there was a very old lady who always sat down front in the Amen corner, and every Sunday morning she'd walk down the aisle with her wide skirts rustling. She dressed rather quaintly, you know. She had a satin shirtwaist on, usually with staves up under her chin. And some of the younger people in the church were inclined to giggle a little bit at this quaint little old lady. And so one Sunday morning, as she was coming down the aisle, some of the teenagers laughed and giggled, and somebody must have said something that maybe hurt her feelings a little bit, because she turned around right in the middle of the church aisle. She said, "That's all right," she said. "You young folks can laugh at me if you want to. You can be stuck up if you want to. But my Lord ain't stuck up."
Yes.
And out of that memory, I wrote this poem, My Lord. My Lord ain't no stuck-up man. My Lord, he ain't proud. When he goes a-walking, he gives me his hand. You, my friend, he lowed. My Lord knowed what it was to work. He knowed how to pray. My Lord's life was trouble too, trouble every day. My Lord ain't no stuck-up man. He's a friend of mine. When he went to have his soul on fire, he told me I was gwine. He said, sure, you'll go with me and be my friend through eternity. Many people have asked me about my own religious beliefs. I have replied to their questions with a very tiny little poem called Personal. In an envelope marked personal, God addressed me a letter. In an envelope marked personal, I have given my answer.
Yes. I have not done too much on religion. I have written two poems recently, though, that were inspired by the Baha'i religion, and I'll read one of those.
You know, Margaret, I saw the Baha'i temple. I was in the Mediterranean, and we stopped at Haifa, and the temple is there up on a hill. Very beautiful temple.
Yes, you sent a postcard with the temple.
Back to
to
Detroit,
me.
hey?
Yes, we were very proud. This poem is entitled Holiday Greetings. Contours of the cradled head, the retroussé face, the croon, bring Christmas, Rizwan, Idul Kabir, with their ringing of bells, attar of roses, and shimmering hover of a pearled new moon. Any of all hours in hovels or towers, or ships in space over this twirled world.
Twirled whirl. You have some lovely phrases in your poems.
Well, we try.
I am known in some circles as a folk poet, you know.
Yes.
Certainly I've written many poems that derive their style and their feeling from Negro folklore. And my blues, many of them have been set to music, and some of them have been sung by singers like Josh White, Juanita Hall. I'd like to read for you a blues. Although written a long time ago, it might very well be contemporary because it's really about Mississippi. Going down the road, Lord, going down the road. Down the road, Lord, way, way down the road. Got to find somebody to help me carry this load. Roads in front of me, nothing to do but walk. Roads in front of me, walk and walk and walk. I'd like to meet a good friend to come along and talk. Hates to be lonely, Lord, I hates to be sad. Says I hates to be lonely, lonely, lonely and sad. But every friend you find seems like they try to do you bad. Road, 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 oh. Road, 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 road. Road, 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 oh, on the northern road. These Mississippi towns ain't fit for a hopping toad.
No, this certainly is apropos to the present time because it's not fit for a hopping toad. I have one that has to do with a geography, sort of. It's titled And Through the Caribbean Sea. It was inspired by a Caucasian who felt that I couldn't sincerely be interested in the Rococo or the Baroque or any of the French periods of furniture. We, like shades that were first conjured up by an African witch doctor's ire, indigo for the drum and the smoke of night, tangerine for the dancing smudged fire, have been forced to exist in a huge kaleidoscope world. We've been shifting with time and sifting through space, at each whimsical turn of the hands that have thrown the kaleidoscope. At each whimsical turns of the hands that have thrown the kaleidoscope, until any pattern or place or shade is our own. The indigo sifting from its drum-like vein toward the blue of the sky that the Goths attain. The tangerine, now the orange of the tango, again the red of the Suzy Q. And each time the turning invaded one pattern, a new one was formed, and in forming each pattern we traded, until who questions whether we'd be proud to pine for a Louis Quinze frame, a voodoo fire, rococo, baroque, an African mask, or a Gothic spire, or any style of any age or any place or name. Thank
You know, I once wrote a couple of poems that might, in a way, be called twin poems, but opposite twins, not identical.
Mhm.
Many of our, as you term them, Caucasian brothers seem to think that all Negroes are just alike, you know?
Yes.
They don't know that there are within our groups uh, many shades of opinion, various social classes, various reactions, conventional or unconventional, to what goes on in the world.
Mm.
At any rate, we do have, as you and I know, poor people, in between people, well-to-do people, people with enough money to send their children to the Sorbonne in Paris. Um, what were you going to say,
I
Margaret?
was going to say, I wonder how it's possible for people not to realize this.
Well, it's because there's such a gulf between
Mhm.
white Americans and black Americans that we often don't know each other. And of course, you know the old saying that the Negro knows the white man better than he
Yes.
knows us, because
So,
very often we work for them and we know them pretty well. But after work, they never see us, you know. It's like Harlem, where I live. In the daytime, you see many whites up there in Harlem because they own many of the shops, and their clerks are, many of them, white.
mhm.
Let 5 o'clock come, 5:30 come, 6 o'clock,
And,
gone. They've gone to Westchester, to Long Island, to downtown, where they live, you see. They don't live with us.
yeah.
And all you see at night in Harlem, the only white people you see are the police, which is not good,
No.
because that immediately makes of the white world a symbol of oppression. And you can walk down the street on Sunday in Harlem. Not very long ago, I walked all the way from 155th Street, where I live, to 127th Street, which is 3747, which is about 30 blocks.
Mhm.
On a Sunday afternoon, I did not see one single white person except a policeman. I was on the alert to see whom I might see. Well, that's my Harlem. At any rate, among ourselves, there are various social classes. And this poem, or this twin poems, shall I say, is about the people who are high, some of them, not all, and the people who are low. And it's a sort of dialogue. So the first one is called Low to High. How can you forget me? But you do. You said you was going to take me up with you. Now you've got your Cadillac. You done forgot that you are black. How can you forget me when I'm you? But you do. How can you forget me, fellas? Say, how can you low-rate me this way? You treat me like you darn well please. Ignore me, though I pay your fees. How can you forget me? But you do. And the answering poem is called High to Low. God knows we have our troubles too, and one of 'em is you. You talk too loud, cuss too loud, look too black, don't get anywhere, and sometimes it seems you don't even care. The way you send your kids to school with their stockings down, not to ethical culture. The way you shout out loud in church, not at St. Philip's. And the way you lounge on doorsteps just as if you were back down south, not at 409 Edgecombe Avenue. The way you clown. In other words, the way you let me down. Me, trying to uphold the race, and you. Well, you can see, we have our problems too.
Yes. That one reminds me of one that I wrote in recognition of a similar problem. As for the hopes that others fondle, I am denied. For whether to stand before the gate and moan will release to me that still is my own is unproven. Who can tether the will-o'-the-wisp tone of a thief, or mold the perplexing truth into patterns that induce belief?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I want to read one poem which has nothing to do with problems at all, but which I like because one time when I was on lecture tour in the Deep South, going from town to town every day, hotel to hotel, I found myself very tired. And in one of the towns where I went, there was a young couple who said, well, look, Langston, since you have a day or two in between engagements, why don't you come with us to our cabin that we have out in the country? So I went with them. It was quiet out there and wonderful, and trees all around. And I wrote this poem there called Carolina Cabin. This was in South Carolina, by the way. There's hanging moss and holly and tall, straight pine about this little cabin in the wood. Inside a crackling fire, warm red wine, and youth and life and laughter that is good. Outside the world is gloomy, the winds of winter cold, as down the road a wandering poet must roam. But here there's peace and laughter and love's old story told, where two people make a home.
That's a very lovely poem.
And you know, this couple, this was written quite a number of years ago. This couple now live in New York City, in Harlem, and their children go to schools, among the best of schools, because they have become quite prosperous. So I think it's, in a way, quite wonderful that out of the Deep South can come the Negro people, make their way in the world, make solid progress, and we now have a generation of Negroes who are able to send their children abroad for education. When I came along, nobody could send me abroad. Nobody sent me anywhere.
It is incredible what we have accomplished.
I want to read you, in closing, two poems. One poem is a humorous one. It's about the race problem. It's about our general rejection from American society, but it is a poem that is done with humor, and it has a title, Not Else But. Hip boots deep in the blues, and I never had a hip boot on. Hair blowing back in the wind, and I never had that much hair. Diamonds in pawn, and I never had a diamond in my natural life. Me in the White House, and ain't never had a black house. Do Jesus, Lord, amen. And I'm going to read you a more serious poem,
Yes.
before I stop. A poem which could very well have been written in this year of our Lord. It's a poem called Democracy. Democracy will not come today, this year, nor ever, through compromise and fear. I have as much right as the other fellow has to stand on my 2 feet and own the land. I tire so of hearing people say, let things take their course. Tomorrow is another day. I do not need my freedom when I'm dead. I cannot live on tomorrow's bread. Freedom is a strong seed planted in a great need. I live here too. I want freedom just as you.